Episode 2,
Yes.
Enlightenment. I'm very
Still,
excited for this topic. It's something that's super close to my heart. So,
it feels like a wild topic to be like, episode 2, we're going to tackle enlightenment. Okay, audacity much.
well, we do live there. And I think the concept of enlightenment is a lot less audacious than most would have us believe. And that's actually what we want to talk about today because people think that enlightenment is this like mystical, almost Disney showroom, unbelievable thing, and they don't realize actually how grounded it is and that you're always in it and you can't leave. You can only pretend to leave. Just like you can only pretend to leave God, you can only pretend to leave enlightenment. And it's kind of fun to pretend to leave. That's why we do that. That's why people leave enlightenment or pretend to leave, because then you get to live in the ego for a bit. And the ego is kind of fun. You came here to have an egoic experience, to have experience in the persona, and everybody's path isn't enlightenment in this lifetime. It is enlightenment eventually. But for now, like you came here to play in the sandbox of limitation, and enlightenment is the stripping away of those limitations. Some would say that's more fun. I think that's more fun to strip away limitations. But others, they came to play in the limitation. That's what they're here for. So enlightenment, they don't want anything to do with it. And that's okay too.
I remember having a conversation with you years ago, and I mentioned the fact that like my goal was never to be Buddha because that sounds just so boring. I said that it was very important to me to keep caring. And if I ever got into this place of total and utter neutrality, wherein I could see justification, because the first thing I want to say here is enlightenment is something that everyone in the spiritual community strives for. It's like the goal, right? It's the end goal. It's one day I will achieve enlightenment. And just that very mindset of striving for enlightenment is contrary to enlightenment. That's you're missing the point literally on right over your head. And so I feel like we have a mental image of what enlightenment looks like, right? And so you think of Christ as an enlightened master, you think of Buddha as an enlightened master. And honestly, there are so many enlightened beings that are just like walking around being plain old Jane and Joe, right? You probably recognize the peace that they carry with them, but you might not identify it as, oh, that stems from enlightenment. But I had originally been like, enlightenment sounds like the lack of fucks. And it was very important to me to have those fucks. And I was thinking my kids, I was like, I don't ever want to get to the point where I'm numb to life. That doesn't sound fun to me. And that's not enlightenment at all. To your point, enlightenment is the recognition that none of this truly counts for anything. Everything is divine and perfect in its current existence. And you can assign meaning and matter, and that's okay. Or you can choose not to assign meaning to the matter, and then that's okay too. And so, as incarnate beings who are forced to participate in the world around us, again, go back to know thyself. Not only is it absolutely safe, but it's really fun once you reach that point and realize that we can just now create without it meaning anything about us. There's no messing up, there's no real failure. And consequences, I think, is a part of the play that we can talk about because obviously there are. And we did mention it, I think, in the first one, wherein some consequences are really good and some consequences are really bad. And by good and bad, we mean it either feels good or it has a desired outcome, or it's socially acceptable, or it feels bad, it has an undesired repercussion, or it's socially unacceptable. But outside of that matrix, nothing is really ever good or bad. And so people are like, oh, so you support murder. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that at all because everyone always goes there. And we can potentially have another episode where we really just talk about good and bad. But here for enlightenment, when we're talking about that kind of state of being, it really is just the acceptance of everything as it is. Nothing necessarily means anything, that we're free to succeed, we're free to fail, we're free to play. And you can't be unenlightened. And to your point, like you can pretend, you can assign matter and meaning to things into the point where you feel unaligned, you feel stressed out, you feel like you're not there, but you could always just release those things too and be right back there.
Yeah, enlightenment is the process of life. And actually, I would say enlightened beings feel deeper than most humans. Because most humans, to pretend is to deny life. And in enlightenment, there's no denial of life. And so there's constant honor and recognition of one's own experience and of the experiences of others. There's no invalidation. There's none of that. There's just a recognition that you are free in every moment, to your point, to choose what you're going to assign meaning to and what you're not going to assign meaning to. Or even deeper, I would say what you're going to assign value to and what you're not going to assign value to. And so the enlightened being recognizes that they are not their thoughts. That doesn't mean that they are denying that thoughts exist. They're simply recognizing that thoughts are happening and they can choose which ones to assign value to, or they can choose to not assign value to any of them. They're in recognition that emotions are happening, but they recognize that they are not their emotions, right? They recognize that they are not separate from anyone or anything around them. And so to honor and to respect the life of another is to honor and respect your own life. They recognize that when they give love by default, because there is no separation, they receive love. And in a similar way, if they have a thought of hate and they assign value to it and they spew hate into the world, they recognize that the repercussions are that that person is a version of you. There is no separation. So they are an extension of yourself. So when you hate another, by default, you are giving yourself hate. And so there's this beautiful cyclic understanding when one ventures into enlightenment that all things matter and none of them matter. And that all things are intensely valuable and beautiful, even the ugly things. And none of them are intensely valuable or beautiful because you can't take any of it with you. And so enlightened beings have actually touched the void. They've gone to the place where nothing matters and they've said, oh, wow, I have access to that. But you can't dwell there. And so they've come back, but just a few steps where most people, when they're living in ego or they're living in a non enlightened state, they've gone in a lot of steps and they're like, everything matters. I assign value to all of my thoughts and I identify with my emotions, and they have disregard for other creators. They have disregard for life. And that is like the epitome of separation, the illusion, the matrix, right? And so enlightened beings have just ventured all the way to the void. They recognize that they are at their core nothing. They are empty space, silence. And they just walked back one or two steps and said, you know what? I am so excited to feel the breeze, to observe the trees, to hug my daughter. You know what I mean? Like, what a trip. It's almost like they came back and they were like, what a fucking mushroom trip that was, bro. You know what I mean? And now they get to really revel in the gloriousness of this limited dream without ever saying it means anything about me. As a spirit, they remain untouched, they remain unstained, but they can have a human experience, and how fucking glorious. What a strange mystery, right? And that's, they live in the space of mystery. That's why you have to release what enlightenment looks like, because you can't know. There's no blueprint, there's no path to enlightenment because your path is unique. So no one can do it for you. And like when they come back and they say, you know what, I'm really going to enjoy this, I'm really going to live here and experience life fully. They've just sort of given up any of those illusory rules about how life should look. If you look around, they're really some of the most engaged people on the planet.
Two things came up while you were talking. The first one is the concept of meditation. I struggled with meditation and I just didn't see the purpose for it. Like I didn't understand, how is it supposed to work? How is me sitting here and like for 20 minutes and turning my brain off, which is impossible, by the way. That's not the point of meditation at all, at ever. That peace, that silence that eventually people who meditate are able to achieve, it's the unattachment with their thoughts. So I'm going to be completely transparent. I'm not a meditator. I feel like I meditate most of the time when I'm not actively working on a thing because I have gotten really good at unattaching myself from my thoughts. And this is something that's actually really valuable as a business owner as well, because once upon a time, I thought every idea I had was for me to execute. Every idea I had was I was missing out on an opportunity to capitalize on this brilliant idea that I had if I didn't take action. And I believe it was actually you who pointed out to me at one point, like one of our very first sessions ever, was like, Sarah, every idea you have doesn't need to come manifest. You can just let it stay out there. And I was like, what? Like, I have that option to just not take action on literally every idea that I have. And that was one super freeing. But what that did was it started to give me the permission almost to be like, well, if I don't have to take and execute every business idea that I come up with, maybe I don't have to actually execute every idea, right? And so that uncoupling of oneself with one's thoughts, just knowing your brain's going to do brain things and it's going to have ideas, and you can either identify with those ideas and thoughts, or you can just say, oh, that's interesting, right? And so I think oftentimes when people meditate, they're really frustrated, or they're like, well, if I can't meditate, I'll never become enlightened, because every enlightened master meditates. And I think the practice of meditation is just a continual reminder that you are not your thoughts and you can just let it go. It also, the deep breathing, we know that regulates the nervous system. That's really important for people in a modern life because our nervous system is triggered constantly these days. So there's real value in meditation, though there's this concept of walking meditation. And if you're not one who can sit still for 20 minutes or 5 minutes and like detach from your thoughts, you don't have to. You can meditate while being actively engaged in the body. That's available to you. But the purpose, my belief, of meditation is just to get in the habit of unattaching meaning and matter to every thought in your head.
I love, love, love that this was where you went with this. Meditation is not the silencing of the mind. The purpose of meditation is to become meditative in everything you do. You can be meditative while washing the dishes. And in fact, I don't know if you've ever been meditative. This is exactly what you talked about in episode 1, where when you do laundry now, you're bringing awareness to the blessing that you have to, one, have a washing machine and dryer and not have to go out back and do that in the river, to two, be able to afford good quality clothing, potentially organic materials that aren't, creating more stress on the environment and more stress on the body. You can look at anything as a blessing. The point of meditation is to become meditative so that in every moment, regardless of what you're doing, your full awareness is in that present moment. And I'll give you a real world example. If you're doing dishes and you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner, you are not being meditative in that moment, because your consciousness is and this is actually where anxiety comes from, in my opinion. I am not a doctor. It's just what I've come to understand through anxiety in my own body. When you are doing something, you're doing the dishes and you are thinking about what you have for dinner, the consciousness is leaving the body. It's attempting to be in the future somewhere, and you have no power in the future. You can't do anything about the future. You may not even make it to dinner. Same is true with the past. If you are doing dishes and you're thinking about something that you said on an Instagram live the other day that maybe somebody didn't like, you're not in your present moment. So the purpose of meditation is to just do the dishes. And eventually, if you can get really good at being present with the dishes, and now the laundry, and now sweeping, and now this email, and now this person, and now this glass of water, what you'll find is you become meditative, and that is enlightenment. Enlightenment is walking every moment, step by step, in intense awareness. So, meditation is not to make your mind completely silent, though your mind does get quieter as you practice being present, because it recognizes that it can't escape to the future anymore. You're not giving any value to it. So when it tries to take you to the future, you don't go there. You don't follow the mind. And that just weakens the hold that the mind has over its wearer, its bearer. And so that's the purpose of meditation. And so when you sit down and close your eyes and try and focus, and you're like, my mind's going a million miles an hour, you don't have to stop that traffic. Just simply bring your awareness to your little pinky. Bring your awareness. Is it cold? Is your little pinky hot? Is your little pinky, is it buzzing? A lot of people, they like to bring awareness to the buzzing in their hands. Okay, that's one moment that you've experienced enlightenment. That's one moment that you were fully meditative. You were completely and utterly present. Go put your feet in a cold river and go, ooh, that's chilly. Look, now you're present, right? Now you're here. And just bring that into everyday moments. And that's walking as an enlightened master.
Oh, amen. That was beautiful. The second thing that your previous conversation brought up for me was this thought exercise that was given to me by the brand strategist that I was working with in Chicago. Maybe she'll listen. Shout out, Rachel. She gives this exercise to all of her clients, and she says, "You're going to die." For the thought exercise, there's no way out of this. You have an option. Would you prefer to die floating in space or on a raft in the middle of the ocean? And those are the two options. And she says, oftentimes people will ask questions and make a choice based on their assessment of which one they could live through. So she'll be like, oh, the raft, because then I can paddle. Like people will, do all of these mental gymnastics to get out of it. Right. And she's like, no, you're missing the point. What way would you prefer to die? And my response to her question, she said she'd never gotten it before. I said, well, the raft, because in my last moments of life, I would prefer to feel the water on my skin and to see the sun or the clouds and to feel life. And she just stared at me and she said, I have never heard anyone give that response. But my value attachment to the experience of this incarnate being that I am has greatly intensified with this work. And when you decide to go down the road of knowing thyself, you're taken on various paths, which you and I talked about. We took very different paths on how we got to where we are. A lot of overlap that we did experience was in that it takes you to the occult, it takes you to the spiritual side with positive polys and good thoughts only. It takes you to those spaces because that's kind of what's available. Religion, that's another one. We both have kind of dabbled in studying of the various religions and their beliefs. And in that journey, in that like spiritual space, everyone's looking outside of what is, right? So if you're in the Christian religion, you're living your life because damn, heaven sounds awesome. So we're again like living to this place that isn't right now. It isn't what we're experiencing now. In the Christian space, it's almost like life sucks, but we promise it gets better. And then in the spiritual community, everyone's trying to transition to 5D, whatever that is, right? The 3D sucks. And so if we can just think enough positive thoughts, pop, we will suddenly be in a totally different world. They call it like a split or division or, the other side of the veil. I'm over here at the other side of all of this going, this right here, right now, the sun, the breeze, the grass, the birds, the wind chimes, like the sounds, our senses, right? The things that we can actually experience. That's it. And I'm not saying just the positive things, even the heart-wrenching moments. Those are moments to be experienced because those heart-wrenching moments should move us in a direction of exploration. If it's societally and we're like, that's the way this is fucked up. Okay, well, then do something about it. If you feel like it's fucked up, that feeling is for you. That feeling is for you to change the way you act, to change the way you show up in the world, to change the way you talk about things. And again, you can only change yourself and what you do. You can't be like, someone should change that, right? You have to do it from yourself. But through the process of getting where we are today, and I'll speak only for myself, it feels like everyone else is trying to exit stage left because that's when things will get better and more beautiful.
Yeah, exactly that. And there's a externalization of heaven is what I'm getting from your riff there. You can't discuss enlightenment and not discuss the embracing of death. And I think it's really funny that the thought exercise that Rachel gave you really, really captures the rules were clear. You're going to die. And this is true, not just for a thought exercise. There is one guarantee on this plane, and it is that you will not last forever. And people are like, well, okay, how can I escape it? And a lot of people, the externalization of heaven is that method of escape, right? They're saying, well, if I have to die here, what's next must be better. And so again, you have no power in the future. They're constantly living in this externalized God, this externalized faith, this externalized heaven. And they're not recognizing that all power under heaven and sun was given to you to create heaven on earth in this right now moment. And it has everything to do with your experience. And I think that disconnect is what has caused so much turmoil on the planet because people are disconnected from life. When we've externalized heaven and we say, one day it'll be good, then we have no recognition for all the moments in between. And so it doesn't really matter what you do here. There's no impact here. And while that's true, this is an illusion. There is no impact and you can't fuck it up. We're seeing the effects of that in this dream that we're all living, where we have terrible things going on in other countries, in our countries doing terrible things to other countries. Those are human lives, and we just sacrifice them at mass because we have total disregard for life. The enlightened being recognizes that all life has just as much meaning as your own life, you know? And so there's a reverence that is replaced with this like weird disdain that everybody has. And that when that reverence goes, you just find people doing crazy shit, murdering people, raping people, pillaging land, stealing land, right? Like you see all this crazy stuff going on. And all of that is because we're waiting for some sky daddy, whether you believe that to be the one and only God or you believe that to be the Pleiadians, you know, the blue avians, like whatever, we're waiting on like the Galactic Federation to come and make a change when really like all that power is yours and you only have that power right now. And so is what you're doing right now in harmony with all of life?
Yeah, again, beautifully put in the fact that you've woven kind of the meditation into the action, right? The meditation being present in the moment mentally. And then what you just mentioned was being present in your actions. What can you do right now? And this, I don't know if we talked about this on, I think maybe this was on the MVP podcast. Nope, it might have just been you and me talking, wherein there's this concept when you want to be a better person or you want to do a thing. Procrastination, for example, is where you put desires, goals off on future you. I'll start that on Monday. I'll do that tomorrow. And there's this psychological phenomenon that happens wherein we actually think we will be a different person tomorrow. Like we're going to be someone who wants to do this. We're going to be someone who has capacity to do this. And so I'm going to start my diet on Monday because Monday me is a better me than current me, right? They're more capable. They're more excited to do this. They're more dedicated to their goals on Monday because current me, not that. And then you get to Monday and you're like, damn it, I am the same me. I still don't want to do this. And that's like an actual thing wherein we cast off these desires, assuming that future you is just a better version of you and that they'll handle it. Right. And so one of the tricks and tips around this is that you have to ask current you to commit in some small way to the goals of future you. So you're pulling forward. You're basically saying, I'm going to start being that version of me now. Small baby steps, right? So if I'm going to start my diet on Monday, I'm going to pass up on the cake today. I'm not going to start the full diet, but I'm going to do this one thing for future me to say that present me is in on this together, right? And when you kind of, you don't, most of us don't intentionally think of ourselves as like different people, but you act as though you're different people. And I love to bring that to my conscious mind. Again, system one, system two. You could listen to episode one in that, and you've heard me say this, like past me was really looking out because I'm really benefiting from past me's dedication and commitment and actions right now. And the same can go for the way I think about trying to achieve things in the future, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to be the person today that future me appreciates. And I'm going to do this thing, this small thing that it'll like snowball on itself. I don't know how I got onto that particular part other than the fact that we like to, I think, believe that like we will be better in the future, but like that starts now. And so if you want to see different results in the world, if you want to live in a world that doesn't have all of this terribleness, the present you is the only one that can make those changes, because when future you comes, it's still present you.
Yeah, and this could go a number of ways. The one of them being that the world, your external world, is a representation of your unconscious mind. And so the more unconscious acceptance, awareness, integration you have, the less of that war and genocide and horrific planet you'll experience, right? And potentially that can be harmful if not done in a realistic way, because it can put you in a bubble and it can say my actions don't affect anyone else. But it what I'm saying here is the opposite of that. Your actions and your what you place value on affects everything else, right? And so again, if there's genocide happening somewhere in the world, you can guarantee that genocide is happening somewhere within you. And people don't like that level of responsibility. And that's why Osho, he talks about one man could be charged with all the crimes on the planet because each of us is responsible. Each of us walking in an unenlightened state, in an unaware state, with a disregard for life, could be held responsible for the disregard of life across the entire planet. I'm not going to go that route, even though I kind of went that route just now. What I really wanted to say was about the highest self. In spirituality, there's this whole thing around I want to be my highest self. Oh, I asked my higher self. And higher self is sort of what you're saying here about future self. It's an externalization of self. You only ever have power in the right now moment. And so saying, I've asked my highest self, why wouldn't you just claim that that was your decision? Why was there a need to journey outside of the self to say, this is what I've decided and this is what I'll do? And then the other thing is that because there's only now, a lot of people, they take future you or highest self and they use that as a means to self abuse. And what I mean by that is that it deepens the illusion of separation because now not only am I separate from Sarah, which can be very dangerous because there's a disregard for Sarah's life. She's outside of me, right? But now Dawn is separate from Dawn. And so you'll hear people oftentimes in my containers, they'll talk about arguing with themselves in their own head. I had this idea and then I thought that's not a good idea. And then I thought, oh, what the fuck? Why are you like this? And then I thought, oh, we should do this over. And what they've done is they've split their mind potentially into multiple pieces, not just division of good or bad, like the angel and the devil, right? But now they have multiple pieces and multiple personalities. And that can be fun. If you want to play with archetypes and you want to map out your personal pantheon, delicious. Also, we have to recognize that there's one being, and that being is assigning meaning. Okay. And so, what a lot of people I've seen do is they'll have a future self or a higher self, and they will say, because I'm not that, something is wrong with me. Right. And then they want to do the work of fixing themselves. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, I'm doing air quotes here, fixing themselves. And at the very beginning, you said enlightenment is not a journey. The very process of seeking implies that you haven't found. And so you are either enlightened and fully aware and fully embodied in this moment, head to toe, or you're not. And you're off in the future thinking about who you could be. And then abusing yourself and abandoning yourself and blaming yourself for not being that future version of you, and then thus creating multiple sets of self within the self. And then there's just this very fragmented consciousness that's occurring. And so when you look out into the world, you can't even see clearly because who's looking? That could vary from minute to minute. And as someone who plays in the land of multiple personalities, because I think it's just so fun, the version of the world that my grumpy witch essence sees and the version of the world that my Mad Hatter sees are entirely different worlds. And then there's the silence. There's the space behind both of them. And that's the truth. And so then we have minor truths. It's how this version views the world and how this version views it. And then we have supreme truth. And as long as you can ground in that observer and you can ground in that supreme truth, you can always find your way home. And it's okay that there's like all these different little thoughts playing in your head and all these different emotions, and that you see the illusion of separation everywhere you look because you know none of that's true.
None of that is true. Takes me to the next point that I jotted down that I want to talk about in this podcast, and that is the concept of knowing. And you and I got into this habit for a little while where we're like, well, what I know to be true. And then we pause and we'd be like, well, not that I can know anything. Now we skip that because we have this understanding between the two of us that like you can't know anything. And logic mind, people will say, well, we know that the earth is round and we know that there are three, now four states of matter, solid, liquid, and gas. We know these fundamental truths, right? And there could be an argument made in the fact that you really only can know what you've personally experienced. Because, yes, we can take some things as being true. We learned it in science. Someone told us. And then science is like, but actually, science changed because we learned more. So, what we knew to be true now is no longer true. It's actually this, right? We could spend an entire episode just listing out things that we learned as a child to be true that are now no longer true. That's how quick, and science is always building on itself. So can we really ever know anything unless we've experienced it ourselves? No, because even the things that you experience yourself are not true. There's a great book on this. It's called The Experience Machine by Andy Clark, and it details scientifically, because he's a neuroscientist, our perception of reality and how even the things that we experience are not necessarily true, and how you and I could experience the same thing. We could even experience it differently, even if we're experiencing the very same thing. And there's lots of studies that have been done on this. And so if we can't know science is true and we can't know what we experience is true, can we really know anything? No. And that's the beauty of enlightenment, because we don't have to attach any meaning to knowledge. We don't have to attach any meaning to knowing anything at all. We can just be comfortable sitting here and saying, well, actually, I know nothing. I don't know. I don't know a damn thing to be true. Now we can pretend to know. Again, we can say, well, what I know to be true is that these things, I'm in the knowledge business. I'm a business coach, strategist, and an expert. I spend my entire days learning and knowing things. So I can pretend and I can say, this is best practice. I've learned this tends to work in these scenarios. In my experience, these things are true. And if anyone was ever to come to me and say, Sarah, that's not true, I'd be like, okay.
There's something really beautiful about unknowing, because when you unknow, when you ask questions, you open potentials. And when you make statements, you close them. And so, what we know is that the brain is hallucinating all of reality. And so, even when you come in and you're like, oh, it's science, science calls on the sensory experience, it calls on what we can see, taste, touch, smell, hear. The problem is that the brain is interpreting what you see, taste, touch, smell, hear. You're not actually, and there's an extensive amount of science on this for the logical minds that want to, but also recognize that what I'm about to say discredits science, because you could go in and say, all right, well, I'm seeing a tree, but you're not actually, you have no fucking idea what you're seeing. Your consciousness has just decided that this hallucination is assigned this symbol and that is assigned this word, right? And then you go deeper into the realm of separation. And then you can say there's facts about trees. They emit oxygen and they absorb carbon dioxide, and we can get really granular. And that's the thing about division, how beautiful it is. It can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and you can continuously go deeper into division, right? Unity consciousness is recognizing that, like, sure, I could go deeper and deeper into division infinitely. Why? And so our science has really just gotten really good at going deeper, and even our religions of today, there's so many of them. Why? Because you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into division. And so when you look at a tree, recognize that you're not seeing a tree. You don't actually know what you're seeing. Your brain is just assigned a word and meaning to that thing. And then we have what's called the collective hallucination. And there's quite a bit of science on this as well, specifically around hallucinogens, right? That's where ironically, we learn a lot about physical reality through hallucinogens. There you go. There's that because you're just hallucinating, right? And so there's an immense amount of science to tell us that we don't know what we're seeing, we're just interpreting it. And then there's a collective agreement on the interpretation. And you can see this in a various number of ways because the collective interpretation of the Bible through the lens of Christianity looks one way. Now, the collective interpretation of that same exact book through another religious sect is going to look entirely different. But they all agree. So which one's right? Right? You and I, we go out and we say, that's a tree. We've agreed on this hallucination. That doesn't make it any more or any less a hallucination because that's all it is. And so, yeah, I'm not really sure why I even wanted to go on that little riff there, but that's where I landed.
Well, it was gorgeous. Hallucination, again, in that book, Andy Clark describes the fact that for a long time, we have assumed that we take our senses, our brain interprets it, and that's what we see, hear, touch, smell, etc. Right? But what science actually tells us is that our brain creates an assumption, and then our senses confirm or deny that assumption. And the only time, and this is where awareness gets really important, and maybe that's another episode for another day, the only time your senses actually trigger your attention to your reality that you've constructed, you've hallucinated your reality, your senses bring attention to things that differ from what your assumption was. That's why you walk through your house and nothing, you just walk through your house, but then something is outside of what your expectations are. Maybe your kid's shoes are on the floor and your attention is drawn to it. And you're like, oh, got to pick those up, right? But it was only the fact that your assumption was there were no shoes on the floor, and then your senses fact check that and was like, nope, actually, there's something over here. And so if you bring attention and awareness to the fact that you are at all times hallucinating your reality based on your expectations and assumptions of reality, and that your senses are only fact checking your hallucination in giving you the opportunity to exist, right? So, like, oh, there's a car coming. My senses indicated that you get to stay alive because you backed out of the street, right? And like when you realize you know nothing, like everything changes. Everything changes because we can't know anything. My red is probably different than your red if we could switch consciousness from one head to the other head. And yet we're all collectively out here arguing over who's right. No one's right. There's no one way. We're literally a bunch of walking prisms experiencing the division of light differently. I'm not a big yogi, but my guess is when people say namaste, you're basically saying the light in me honors the light in you, and the fact that I'm a different vessel. The light is coming through me and being interpreted different, but I honor the fact that the light, the same light, that one story, the oneness, the nothingness is funneling through your prism, and you're having a different experience, but we're meeting. And how awesome that our two little versions of prism, light prisms, are meeting together. We're sharing stories, some of which we'll agree on, some of which we won't agree on, but we're just out here doing the damn thing.
How
Right?
fucking beautiful. That's
Right?
enlightenment. How fucking beautiful. You know what I mean? And a lot of people can feel that if I don't know anything, it's really disorienting, right? Like where's the floor? Where's the ceiling? Where are the walls? Where are the edges if I don't know anything to be true? And that's yesterday you made the comment at the beginning of the podcast about the more spiritual you became, the more grounded you became. And it's not like you're out here floating around in the void. And for a long time on my path, I thought that was the goal, was to just return to void. The problem is that void can't experience itself and thus creation, right? That's what all of us have. You have to have a prism to be able to experience the world. And so not knowing anything can be very disorienting, very disarming. It is very disarming, which is beautiful. Why do you need to carry arms? You know what I mean? Why are you guarded? Only because you're trying to protect a false version of you, what you know to be true about yourself. And so when you have triggers or guards that come up, it's because you're trying to protect a story and you want that story to be true. And so the freedom that comes when you don't know anything is being able to put down stories and pick them up at will, never having to assign value to them or assign meaning to them, simply to observe that they're occurring. And so once you get to the past the fear of like it sounds terrifying to not know anything. Then you can play in the land of like what's possible. Here's a little thing, guys. This came from the book The Way of Mastery, which is my all-time favorite book by the Shanti Christo Foundation. And he says that miracles are not a change in circumstances. They are merely a recognition of what always was. And you guys, you have to understand that when you're closing a circuit, when you're defining and confining a story, you're saying, this is what it will be. When you say, I don't know what it will be, then you enter wonderland because then all things are possible. And this is the realm where you walk and miracles occur. They're all around you, they're happening all the time. If you've ever meditated on a blade of grass, it is the most miraculous shit. You want to talk about taking hallucinogens? You don't need to. Your consciousness can do this just by asking questions instead of making statements. Meditate on a blade of grass. How fucking insane is it that all these things in the entire universe had to come together just so that there was enough nutrients, that grass even existed, that this plane is just far enough from the sun, that this blade of grass grew. And then look around how many blades of grass are around you. You are surrounded by the miraculous, and you can't see it when you're closing your prism and you're making statements about what is. And so get out there and don't know shit, because then everything becomes wonderful again. Christ said, Be ye like little children. And that's exactly what he meant. Children, they don't know anything. And so everything to them is wonderful. Now, that could be terrifying. Maybe they die, right? Because they didn't know that, like, you can't eat, I don't know, like antifreeze. Okay. Like, you shouldn't eat that. They were like, ooh, blue, how exciting, right? And then they die. Okay. But here's the thing, guys, you're all going to die anyway. You know what I mean? You like, I mean, really, you could go as so far as to say, who told you you had to survive? Right? And then people, that's usually where people get a little turned off. But I'm telling you, it's the land of giants, it's the land of miracles. 10 out of 10 recommend. We'll absolutely go there again.
Absolutely. And I feel like this particular podcast came after Know Thyself, because knowing yourself and enlightenment are like hand in hand, but enlightenment feels so unachievable and it feels so out there to so many. And we wanted to let people know that, like, you're already enlightened. The challenge that people have in experiencing enlightenment is because they're attached to all their stories. And we mentioned yesterday that just drop it. But what does dropping it mean, right? And we wanted to make it clear to people that you can drop your stories, enter enlightenment, and all it requires is for you to be present in every moment. And the version of you in this moment doesn't have to be the version of you in the next moment. And think of all of the stories you could tell yourself as a closet. And you can just pick, I'm telling myself this story today. I'm telling myself this story today. And that's it. Whatever you're experiencing right now, wherever there's anxiety in your body, wherever there's a misalignment. And this is what I do as a business coach. I just got off a call. This beautiful business owner in Atlanta, Georgia, she was drastically undercharging. I explained to her the value of confidence in your pricing and how that the opportunities that, come with pricing yourself accordingly. And she was very much like, no one is going to pay that. And then another person on the call said, just for context, I started around the same time as you did. I just booked an event and it was 5 times more than this woman was charging. And the woman's like jaw dropped. And she's like, oh my God, people will pay that. Okay, new story, pulling a new story out of the closet. I'm wearing that story now, right? And sometimes all we're doing as coaches is allowing people to see the possibility of other stories, because it's hard for us to get people to drop all their stories all at once. So we just got to baby step them through the opportunity. So if you've listened to this podcast, you've gone all this way, Don and I know you can just drop it and you're there. But if that feels unachievable, just choose one story that you're telling yourself about whatever it is that you're telling, and just drop it and choose a new story. If you tell yourself, I procrastinate, okay, do something today, right now, because you only have this moment right now. What can you do right in this very moment to change that story? If I tell myself I'm a procrastinator, if there's something I'm doing, I'm going to do that right now. Now I'm no longer a procrastinator. In this moment, I'm not a procrastinator, right? And we can just take it one moment at a time.
Yeah. And when you drop a story, you have to stop telling it. And most people, that's where A lot of your thoughts are habitual. I think they say like 95% of the thoughts you have today are the same as the thoughts you had yesterday. And so that's why this is a very conscious process. And so while there is no path to enlightenment, and there isn't, because once you get there, you realize you were always there. The shedding process does feel like a process. And so putting down a story is consciously deciding that if I'm not a procrastinator in this moment, because I'm doing something about it, in the next moment when the thought says, "Oh, you're such a procrastinator," guess what? We have to commit to that new story again. And you have to keep committing to the new story. And this is why it's easier to sleep, because it takes an immense amount of effort to be aware until you're awake, and then it's no effort at all. But the process of waking up feels like it can feel daunting, because if I have this one story that I'm a procrastinator, then I move through that. Now I have 150 other stories that I'm running that need to be moved, right?
Feels like dying.
It,
'Cause you are
right,
dying. The version of
right.
you are so attached to, you're like, I'm not only do I not have to be that person, I'm not actually that person. I'm only that person because I've adopted all of these stories. That person now dies. You can choose to revive them, zombie mode, right? You can continue being that person and showing up that way. But most people aren't comfortable, right? And that's why the higher self comes in. That's why their future self comes in, because they're like, that version of me is way cooler. I want to be that version of me. And so they're again handing their power card over to a version of them that doesn't exist. The only version of them that exists is this vision right now. And they're handing their power card over. And so when you let it all go, you die. And so people are attached to those stories. And so that's why they don't want to give it up, because it's like, ah, it's uncomfortable. I'm dying. You are.
You are. Enlightenment is death, and nothing is required for you to die, and it's actually guaranteed. So you might as well die in small ways and create something fucking epic before you die in the big way. And who knows what happens after that, but you might as well consciously engage with that process. Death, to me, we should do an entire episode on death, because she's such a beautiful friend, such a wonderful teacher. And if you heard that and you're like, "Oh no, I'm terrified of death," that episode will absolutely be for you. There's so many keys and endings, and that's what death is. It's the representation of the ultimate ending, right? And you can create small deaths, just like you just said, and experience the gloriousness. If you ever broke up with somebody that was like complete ass, like you have an ex-husband and you're like, "Oh, glad that's over." All right, well, that was death. A new you had to be created. And the new you is probably the friction that you felt when the relationship needed to come to an end. And if you're feeling friction now, potentially it's because you need to raise your prices. It's because the business that you're in no longer serves you and you need to switch gears completely. It's because the state that you live in isn't serving you in your enlightenment or your next level, right? And so engage in small deaths and open up to all the possibilities.
Beautiful. I think we should end it there because we could continue talking forever and ever. And we covered a lot of really deep content in this very short period of time. So, if you've enjoyed what you've listened to, if you have questions regarding what you've listened to, then feel free to hit us up and engage with us, ask questions. We want to be guides along this path of enlightenment, this path of life. You don't even have to call it enlightenment. If you feel friction, if you feel like you need a reflection, someone to point out to you where you're holding yourself back, we are here for that. And we will be back soon with another topic and we'll do it all over again.